Welcome back to Economics Unbound. Tonight we're focusing on SOEs and the SABC in particular, looking at the tension between the SABC's public mandate, what it needs to do, and its commercial model. It relies overwhelmingly for its survival on advertising revenue. And is this sustainable for the future? To discuss, I'm now joined in studio by Caxton Professor of Journalism at Wits, Anton Harber. He's also a former editor at the Mail and Guardian, former editor-in-chief of eNCA, and an author as well. We're also joined by the National Coordinator of Save Our SABC, Duduetsang Makuse. Thank you both for being with me tonight. Anton, can we start with you? How unusual is this model? Maybe you don't know all the global examples, but the BBC, for example, is purely funded by government, as far as I know, and we're this hybrid.
Yes. BBC inside Britain is funded by licence fees. And so that yes, that's through government means, and we're unusual in that we have such an overwhelming dependence on advertising. In other words, a commercial model for a public service station. So there is a constant tension between the commercial interest and the need to bring in advertising, and the public interest in serving the public mandate. That tension is there. It can be quite healthy, but frankly, the balance isn't there because there's such an overwhelming dependence on advertising. It does mean that public service is often sacrificed to that.
Is this tension something that worries Save Our SABC?
Absolutely, it should worry everyone actually, because part of the additional tensions that are unique to media enterprises is the commercial versus the editorial. And what makes the SABC even more unique is the fact that the editorial is not just either purely entertainment or purely news media like other private entities would have to deal with. You actually have to deal with a host of requirements that have to do with the democratic project and what it means for the country. So for me, there's a cultural third sort of socio-political pedestal there where you're sort of trying to balance a tripod rather than a seesaw like other media entities have to do.
It's quite ironic because often the narrative around the SABC is government interference, but what we are talking about here is a reliance on commercial interests, and that can become very powerful, can't it?
I think an over-reliance on either government or commercial funding is problematic. It doesn't matter which country you're in, which context you're in. Any over-reliance on any one of those at some point will suggest that you're sort of opening a back door or keeping it open. It sort of, it brings back the idea of whoever paid the bill controls what's being said. And that's the balance that you sort of have to watch out for and make sure that you're getting enough from every little pot available rather than from one specific pot.
So you don't agree with purely public funding?
I would not agree with purely public funding, no.
Would the BBC model work for us, Anton?
Look, in an ideal world, it has advantages, but given our current economic circumstances, that isn't going to happen. So I think we must look for a balance between the two. But I think you also have to be careful. The BBC has a long established structure and tradition to protect its independence, and its independence has occasionally been challenged by the government wielding the checkbook. So a balance between different sources of funding that keeps some distance from both commercial and government interests is desirable.
So what would that mean right now? More government funding, and would that be palatable to South Africans?
Look, I think some more government funding is inevitable. You're not looking at the scale of Eskom or even SA Airways, so it's a much more modest amount. You do have a need first to stabilize the SABC and ensure that it's maximizing its commercial interests. You have to get past this era we've had where it seems there's been quite a lot of mismanagement that's led to loss making. We don't have a corporate board at the moment. So the first step is to stabilize the organization, as it is with Eskom and SA Airways as well. You have to stabilize the governance, get the governance right, stabilize the organization, make sure its fundamentals are in place. And then I think we can have a proper debate about various funding models. I wish there would be a debate about whether there's virtue in breaking up the SABC, in rather having 2 public broadcasters or 3 public broadcasters that compete with each other for resources.
And how would that be split up?
Well, my personal view would be that the SABC should sell 51% of its commercial stations and focus on public service broadcasting. And that because the SABC is such a big, powerful, important institution, it's a subject always of political contestation. It will always be, but it would be a healthy situation, I think, if public funding went into a fund that was available for more than one public broadcaster.
And then let's ask your opinion here. I guess then it could really focus on the public mandate. If you sold off some of those commercial interests, you really do the programming that counts, and it may not be necessarily popular or very profitable.
I'd skin the cat slightly differently from that. So instead of selling off the commercial aspect of it, I'd literally go back to the founding legislation and do away with the public-private division and the commercial division. Because in reality, the public services are actually subsidizing the commercial instead of the other way around. So I would rather amalgamate it, and thereafter I would look into increasing government funding, but for specifically public mandate content. So sports that are obscure and not necessarily national interest, national events, state funerals, all of the expensive stuff that the SABC has to broadcast, that should come from government. The rest of it, they should be left to do it editorially as they please, and thereafter we can talk about whether or not we're moving into digital platforms and other methods that would allow us to exploit the revenues from current assets.
Yeah. Does that sound good to you?
Well, I've no doubt your last point is a critical one, is the SABC should be right at the front of offering digital information, online, digital, social media information to its audiences. It's a seriously neglected problem. It's a major problem that the SABC isn't up there. So once it's stabilized and gets steady on its feet, I would have thought that that's an absolute priority for the SABC. There's no point in huge investment in traditional television, which is being displaced by online digital media. That's where you have to invest and grow.
So I don't know if I'm being biased now, but I think we have a great digital team and a very strong presence on YouTube. Millions of people looking at some of the content, but you're talking about cutting edge, sort of next generation thinking, I think.
SABC has an online presence. I think it should be much greater, much more cutting edge, much more experimental, much more serving its audience than it is at the moment.
What you said earlier was interesting about the mismanagement. So we're talking about maybe this financial model needs to be changed. Let me start with you. The way things are at the SABC now, the financial black hole, many could call it, is that because of the tension we're talking about, a bad model, or because of mismanagement?
A little bit of both. I think obviously the funding model was always going to be problematic, just purely because that's the nature of public broadcasters and media entities worldwide. But here we also have a situation where you have cyclical historic mismanagement and governance issues that led to a situation where we actually have not been fully exploiting commercially the SABC's intellectual property, for example. If we were, we would have been able to say, well, we've been able to get rights and royalties from this, and now we've moved it to that platform, and now we've exported, and we're reaching world markets with South African local content, and we're selling it abroad. But we haven't been able to break into those other markets and actually make real money from them. So that's what I mean when I say mismanagement. And never mind the historic debt and the problems that obviously came from that. There's also the untapped potential that we're sitting with that we need to look into.
So one of the managers often blamed Hladi Motsoeneng. Your views, Anton?
Look, there's no question that the SABC is losing money because it was grossly mismanaged. When it was decently managed, it made a profit. And yes, the economy is tighter, advertising has become more difficult, but there's no reason why the SABC shouldn't be breaking even, and it should get back there. And then once it's back there, a whole lot of plans can be made around where investment should go, where the future lies, how best to make use of those.
So that's important. Even with the current model, we should be making a profit, and that has been done before.
There's no question when it's well run, it's positioned to make profit, and it should absolutely be required to at least break even. It should not require a bailout, and it should have sufficiently good governance to ensure that it doesn't get into that position again.
Regardless of what you think of him, Tlhadi Motsoeneng did try to do something quite radical, which I think is interesting, that 90%, which would have been big for South African musicians. And the idea is there that you don't worry about the advertisers who maybe want the global acts, you focus on local content, come hell or high water. What do you think of that idea? I'd like to ask both of you. And was it right that it was scuppered, or is that an example where the SABC can't do radical things, and we won't be able to do that in the future because of the advertising reliance?
There's nothing wrong with increasing local content quotas. In fact, we have to increase local content quotas. We're an anomaly in the sense that where other regions are focusing on investing in local content, we are divesting from it. We should have a local content fund that is funded by different sources, where different producers are able to get funding and get their products out there. The problem here was that it wasn't done in a commercially sensible way. You should have had terms in place, you should have had a timeline, gradually increasing the quotas as you react to the market forces. But this was an overnight decision, and cheers, goodbye. You have things that are scheduled, you've got agreements in place with advertisers, and you're scrapping all of it. You're going to lose more money than make money. Local content is #1 winning content in South Africa. All we needed to do was do it in a systemic and strategic way, and we would have won.
And this is just an example, but it's talking about the public broadcaster being bold in future. I'll give you the final word because we're running out of time.
There's no question that boldness is needed, and I'm with her absolutely that high local content is highly desirable, is a must for the public broadcaster. But it became an example of bad governance. Proper governance, the board would have said, let's do it over 2-3 years, let's cost it, let's work out how we're going to pay for it, and then we can achieve it. It was done overnight, it cost a fortune of money, it put SABC into loss, and they had a retreat. That's not boldness, that's foolishness.
All right, thank you both. I wish we could carry on. There's so much about the future because things are going online and the SABC has to follow, like you said, but thank you for your input tonight. That was Caxton Professor of Journalism at Wits, Anton Harber, and Duduetsang Makuse, a National Coordinator of Save Our SABC Coalition.